Today is Monday, September the 24th, and this is The Drill. And thank you very much. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States of America, because I'm the only one that makes the presumption for the status quo. So I read on the Drudge Report the other day that the Democrats are supposed to be leading going into the midterm elections by 16 points, something like that. My first thought was BS. I'm not interested in the polls or the surveys because so very often they're just flat out lies. It's supposed to be, first of all, a random sampling of the way polls and surveys are supposed to work is a random sampling of a whatever your population is. In this particular case, it would be, I would assume, it didn't say right off the top, but that it would be of registered voters. So I don't know how many millions of registered voters there are, but very often you're looking at surveys or polls that are polling or surveying 500 or 1,000 people and then purport to represent the opinions of the entire population, very often of the United States, but in this case of the voting electorate. And so that's just unbelievable. There should be no confidence in that kind of a poll. It used to be in this country that when a news agency reported a poll or a survey, they would report it that of those surveyed, 60% said X. Of those surveyed, 20% said Y. Whatever the situation was. If it was a political survey, they would say, of those surveyed, 16%, or the Democrats were up by 16 points. That 46% were going to vote Democrat and 30% were going to vote Republican. That kind of thing. And it used to be random. You would call people at random. And now everything is staged. The polling agencies deliberately try to skew things in a certain way. They want more women than men, or they want more weighted. They call it weighting, but it's actually just skewing it. And so that should give us even less confidence in any of these polls. Add to the fact, the third reason they should have no confidence is that they've been wrong. I mean, at least if they'd gotten it right. And it's not hard. Very often these polls are binary. We're talking about being able to predict one of two outcomes. We're not talking about having to predict from 13 or 14 different possible outcomes. It's usually one of two. Either the Democrats are going to win or the Republicans are going to win. It's going to be either Donald Trump or it's going to be Hillary Clinton. That kind of thing. The proposition will either pass or it will fail. And so often, again, the pollsters are wrong because they're busy not trying to report and reflect the will of the electorate in this particular case, but instead trying to shape reality, trying to dictate to people what it is that they believe is correct. They think that a certain policy is correct, then they want to report it as being favorable. That the most of the Americans or most Californians or whatever the body is that they're surveying, or the general population that they're surveying is supports it, so that they can encourage and create momentum to go ahead and make that happen. So they thereby shape reality. Same thing with a lot of their other news broadcasts. Is just simply we're going to report things news events that support a particular point of view, or report them in a certain way so that they reflect that point of view, so that they're not at all unbiased as they used to be. A lot of that, of course, has to do with the fact that news reporting now, except for the newspapers, but the television news reporting is for profit, whereas television news reporting used to be a non-profit situation. So the only motive that the news people on television had in terms of reporting the news was good motives, integrity, maintaining their integrity and credibility, because that's basically the only reason to do it. You're not gonna make the network lots more money by reporting by what you report. So now that it's for profit, the idea is that to put things on the front page, put things in the newspaper, put things on television that are going to attract viewers, that are going to raise ratings, and are going to make the network money. So making it, however, less credible because they have less integrity and less consistency. So again, polls and surveys, I just skip it. I don't want to read it. Most of the time, even when they're talking about polls and surveys, they don't even have the decency to tell you who conducted the poll and where you can get further details in terms of how the poll was set up and how it was conducted. So, excuse me, when we come back, I'm going to be doing, reading a little bit from the Ayn Rand, let's see, the Ayn Rand, what is it called? The Lexicon. Very short couple of entries on the, or actually an entry on the Ayn Rand lexicon, and then I'm going to go ahead and read from the Ayn Rand interview, and then finish up with the it would be which book? Well, anyways, one of the 10 books that screwed up the world when I come back. Thank you very much. Welcome back. And from the Ayn Rand lexicon, chance. Since things are what they are, since everything that exists possesses a specific identity, nothing in reality can occur causelessly or by chance. Choice, however, is not chance. Volition is not an exception to the law of causality. It is a type of causation. So, love the Ayn Rand lexicon. It helps to explain a lot of where Ayn Rand was coming from. It's always good to define your terms, and so that's what the Ayn Rand lexicon does. So, let's see. All right, now all I have to do is get to. Where is it? Nope. Can't be that far. So I'm using my Kindle. So I do a lot of this on the Kindle, so I don't have to mess around with... Let's see this. Oh, there it is. Okay. Anyway, so I don't have to spend a lot of time... it's awkward to try to hold the microphone and then holding a book open at the same time. So found it, and let's see. So we were at basically the reason I like to do interviews or read the interviews is because that's the way you can expose a lot of left-wing tactics and techniques in terms of getting in your psyche. That's what the left wants to do. They figure if they can get in your psyche, they can turn you psychologically from a capitalist into a socialist. And once they've done that to enough people, then it's going to be very simple to turn the whole country into socialism and start ruling as socialists. So, in this particular interview, there's been areas that I've noted where Ayn Rand has missed certain things and certain opportunities to straighten the interviewer out, so to speak. But most of it so far has been rather straightforward and rather fair, asking non-leading questions, asking questions of good faith, how Ayn Rand thinks about things, how she feels about things, how she would vote, that kind of situation, rather than trying to lead her to a preconceived conclusion. So, Playboy, you have attacked Governor Nelson Rockefeller for lumping all opponents of the welfare state with actual crackpots. It was clear from his remarks that, among others, he was aiming his criticism at the John Birch Society. Do you resent being lumped with the John Birchers? Do you consider them crackpots or a force for good? And again, another decent question. Rand, I resent being lumped with anyone. I resent the modern method of never defining ideas and lumping totally different people into a collective by means of smears and derogatory terms. I resent Governor Rockefeller's smear tactics, his refusal to identify specifically whom and what he meant. As far as I'm concerned, I repeat, I don't want to be lumped with anyone, and certainly not with the John Birch Society. Do I consider them crackpots? No, not necessarily. What is wrong with them is they don't seem to have any specific, clearly defined political philosophy. Therefore, some of them may be crackpots, others may be very well-meaning citizens. I consider the Birch Society futile because they're not for capitalism, but merely against communism. I gather they believe that the disastrous state of today's world is caused by a communist conspiracy. This is childishly naive and superficial. No country can be destroyed by a mere conspiracy. It can be destroyed only by ideas. The Birchers seem to be either non-intellectual or anti-intellectual. They do not attach importance to ideas. They do not realize that the great battle in the world today is a philosophical, ideological conflict. Playboy, are there any political groups in the United States today of which you approve? Rand, political groups as such? No. Is there any political group today which is fully consistent? Such groups today are guided or advocate blatant contradictions. Playboy, do you have any personal political aspirations yourself? Have you ever considered running for office? Rand, certainly not. And I trust that you don't hate me enough to wish such a thing on me. Playboy, but you are interested in politics, or at least in political theory, aren't you? Rand, let me answer you this way. When I came here from Soviet Russia, I was interested in politics for only one reason: to reach the day when I would not have to be interested in politics. I wanted to secure a society in which I would be free to pursue my own concerns and goals, knowing that the government would not interfere to wreck them, knowing that my life, my work, my future were not at the mercy of the state or of a dictator's whim. This is still my attitude today. Only today I know that such a society is an ideal not yet achieved, that I cannot expect others to achieve it for me, and that I, like every other responsible citizen, must do everything possible to achieve it. In other words, I'm interested in politics only in order to secure and protect freedom. There's a saying about working oneself out of a job. That you basically work not from the standpoint of having something to do every day, but working in order to actually accomplish something. You try to get the ultimate, I suppose, contribution you can make to a company is, if you're a secretary, for instance, is to work in such a way as to make yourself and your position obsolete, so the company no longer needs a secretary and no longer needs to spend the money to pay for a secretary, just to pay for pay and benefits. And so basically that's what it sounds like Ayn Rand is getting at here, is the idea of engaging in politics so that at some point in the future she will no longer need to engage in politics. And it used to be a lot that way in this country, where most people could just didn't have to bother to vote, didn't have to bother to pay attention too much to what is going on politically. They could be pretty much oblivious to it and just go out and live their lives, go out and raise their children and have their homes and whatnot, and basically live the American dream. In Europe, I remember watching a documentary, and it was about a small city in Italy. And in this city, the ladies of the city were conducting a protest. They had some kind of a march and a protest, and when they got to City Hall, they all pinched their babies. The leaders of this particular movement, such as it is, encouraged them to do that. Pinch your babies when you get to City Hall, so that they would all start crying. So then the mayor, and this is all, of course, occurring in Italian, so you have to figure it out by subtitles, but the mayor was asked, why are all your babies crying? Says one lady. She says, they're crying because there's not enough childcare in this city. Okay, that's what started this protest. All of these women had to go out and politically protest in order to get child care centers, places, babysitters, basically. In this country, it was, and it still is to a certain degree, a place where you could, if a parent saw that there was a need for child care, there's a lot of working women, working families, and they needed somebody, a safe place with which to drop off their children and have their children be raised or whatever, then somebody could just say, you know what, I'll charge you X amount of dollars, bring them to my house, and I'll take care of them for you while you're at work, right? Everybody in the neighborhood knows who this person is, trusts them. Okay, fine. Now, of course, you have to have, various, you have a license and other types of regulatory hurdles that you have to overcome in order to have a daycare center. But it's still, I think, depending on how many children you're going to be looking after, still a relatively simple process as compared to Europe, where it cannot be done without the permission of the city council. So whatever city you live in, you have anything you want done differently has to be approved by the city council. So that means every time you want something new done in your city, you have to organize a protest. You have to organize a march, to convince the local officials to give you what it is you want. And I think that's an example of what Ayn Rand wants to see us avoid. That, again, the idea where we can live our lives, I will simply go out and do what it is that, I see something, I see a need, and I fill it. Which is the credo of capitalism. Find a need, then fill it. The left wing likes to warp that and call it make a need, and then fill it, which is not at all what capitalism is about. Find a need, then fill it, and you don't ask the political parties. By the way, I don't loathe you using the word government. Okay, you're basically asking a political party's permission to do things when you have to go to, quote, the government. Because government is properly understood is simply the apparatus by which political parties gain, maintain, and wield power. Okay, when I come back, I'm going to read from the 10 books that screwed up the world. Thank you very much. And 10 books that screwed up the world. How could I forget? Machiavelli. That's where we left off on this, was Machiavelli, The Prince, the book written by Machiavelli. I guess he's written several or many books, but the only one that seems anybody's ever heard of is The Prince. So, from the book, but duplicity isn't the only patrimony of Machiavelli's The Prince. The damage is much deeper than that. The kind of advice Machiavelli offers in The Prince is only possible for someone to give and to take who has no fear of hell, who has discarded the notion of human soul living on after death as a foolish fiction, who believes that since there is no God, then we are free to be wicked if it serves our purposes. That is not to say that Machiavelli ever advises being evil merely for its own sake. He does something far more destructive. Evil is offered under the excusing pretext that it is beneficial. Machiavelli convinces the reader that great evils, unspeakable crimes, foul deeds are not only excusable, but praiseworthy if they are done in the service of some good. Since this advice occurs in the context of atheism, then there are no limits on the kind of evil one can do if he thinks it is somehow benefiting humanity. It should not surprise us that The Prince was a favorite book of the atheist V.I. Lenin, for whom the glorious end of communism justified any brutality of means. Since this will remain an important connection in most of the subsequent books we cover, we must dwell on the deep connections between atheism and the kind of ruthless advice Machiavelli gives. It is a fundamental principle of Christianity, the religion that defined the culture into which Machiavelli was born and the religion he rejected, that it is never permissible to do evil in the service of good. You can't lie about your credentials to get elected to office. You can't kill an innocent baby to advance your career. You can't start a war to boost the economy or your approval ratings. You can't resort to cannibalism to solve the hunger problem. You can't commit adultery to get a job promotion. The source of this prohibition is obviously the fact that some actions are intrinsically evil. No matter the circumstances or the alleged or even actual benefits, some acts cannot be committed. Unfortunately, this is not the way we generally think today. When you suggest to someone that there's some intrinsically evil actions, so foul, so unholy, that even to think of doing them leaves a black mark on the soul, the usual response is a smirk, followed by a wildly contrived example that is supposed to force you into choosing some horrible evil deed to avoid even more horrible consequences. What if a terrorist, quote, what if a terrorist gives you a choice, either shoot and skin your grandmother or will blow up New York, unquote. The hidden assumption of the smirker is that, of course, the moral thing to do is to save New York by shooting and skinning your grandmother, and that goes to show you there are no moral absolutes. Of course, smirkers are rarely logical. If there really are no intrinsically evil actions, then it is quite fine to have New York blown up in order to save your grandmother. But the real point for our purposes is that the smirker is using precisely the mode of reasoning that Machiavelli uses in The Prince. Machiavelli is the original ends justify the means philosopher. No act is so evil that some necessity or benefit cannot mitigate it. But how is this all linked to atheism? Again, we must use the religion that historically defines the beliefs Machiavelli rejected. For the Christian, no earthly necessity or benefit can be weighed against eternity. Committing an intrinsically evil act immediately separates us from the eternal good of heaven, whatever the benefit that might accrue to us in the here and now. No good we experience now can possibly outweigh having to suffer eternally in hell. Furthermore, as God is all-powerful, then no seeming necessity or benefit of an evil action in this life can really be necessary or beneficial to anyone from the perspective of eternity. To believe otherwise is only a temptation. In fact, the temptation. As we shall see in subsequent chapters, yielding to the temptation to do evil in the service of good will be the source of unprecedented carnage in the 20th century, so horrifying that to those who lived through it, it seemed hell had come to earth, even though it was largely perpetrated by people who had discarded the notion of hell. The lesson learned, or that should have been learned, by such epic destruction is this: once we allow ourselves to do evil so that some perceived good may follow, we allow even greater evils for the sake of ever more questionable goods, until we consent to the greatest evils for the sake of mere trifles. Remove God, and soon there is no limit on evil at all, and no good is too trivial an excuse. Consider a report from the British newspaper The Observer 3 years ago in the Ukraine. 3 years ago, in the Ukraine, suffering so long under the atheist Soviet foot, pregnant women were being paid about $180 for their fetuses, which the abortion clinics turned around and sold for $9,000. Why? The tissue was being used for beauty treatments. Pregnant women were and still are being paid to kill their babies so aging Russian women can rejuvenate their skin with fetal cosmetics. But to return to Machiavelli, our point is this: to embrace the notion that it is not only permissible but also laudable to do evil so that good might come, one must reject God, the soul, and the afterlife. That is just what Machiavelli did, and that is the ultimate effect of his counsel. And I'm going to leave it right there for the time being. And by the way, the author of this book, and there's another book also called 10 Books That Every Conservative Must Read, and he's done many other books on morality and whatnot, is, if you haven't guessed, Catholic. So, In any case, that brings us to the end of another edition of The Drill. I thank you for listening, and until next time, have a great day.